Hello everybody, what is up? This is Ian again from Go Infinite MTG with a Commander Spotlight. This time we are going to cover Atraxa Praetor's Voice in a deck that I like to call Atraxa's Marvelous-Paradox. Atraxa is a 4/4 legendary creature who costs 1 green, white, blue, and black. And she has flying, vigilance, death touch, lifelink. And the most important part is that she proliferates at the beginning of your end step. And that's going to be really important because we're going to need it for energy counters. Now the deck is called Marvelous Paradox because of the combo that works between Aetherworks Marvel and Paradox Engine. Now, Aetherworks Marvel is whenever a permanent you control is put into a graveyard, you get an energy counter. And you can pay 6 to look at the top 6 cards and cast one of them without paying their mana costs. And the way Paradox Engine works is whenever you cast a spell, untap all non-land permanents you control. So, when you activate Aetherworks Marvel and you tap it, and you cast a spell, you get to untap Aetherworks Marvel. So as long as you have energy, you can keep doing this, which is very, very important. Okay, so how do we build this deck? Well, we need some energy producers. So first off, are probably the two best energy producers in the deck, Gonti's Aetherheart and Era of Innovation. Now, for Gonti's Aetherheart, when it or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you do get 2 energy counters. And you can pay 8 energy and exile it to take an extra turn after this one. I don't usually have to do that, but it is really nice to have in a pinch. And Era of Innovation is whenever an artifact or artificer enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 colorless. If you do, you get 2 energy counters. And you could pay 6 energy counters and sacrifice it to draw 3 cards. So they both create a ton of energy and have a second ability that is just an extra upside. Now we also have Consulate Surveillance and Deadlock Trap. Both of these are hyper defensive cards. They're going to let you live long enough for you to get the combo. So for Consulate Surveillance, when it enters the battlefield, you get 4 energy, and you can pay 2 energy to prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn by a source of your choice. So a lot of decks that are heavy aggro, you can just dump your energy into this and you'll just stay alive. And the other one is Deadlock Trap, where it enters the battlefield tapped, and you get 2 energy counters when it enters the battlefield. You can tap it and pay an energy to tap target creature or planeswalker, and the most important part is its activated abilities can't be activated this turn. So if you have something that you really, really need to lock down, this card is super good for that. Okay, next up are 2 utility energy producers in Servant of the Conduit and Demon of Dark Schemes. Now Servant gets you 2 energy when it enters, and you can tap it and pay an energy to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So it acts as a ramp, it acts as a mana fixer. It's just super good to have, especially in the early game. And Demon of Dark Schemes is when it enters the battlefield, all creatures get -2/-2 till end of turn. So this can nuke your opponents. It can kill tokens that you make, which is really important because you get energy whenever things die. And it also has, whenever another creature dies, you get an energy. So this can drop down on the field and potentially get you 5+ energy just from playing it. And you can pay 2 and a black, pay 4 energy, and put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control tapped. So this card is really good. I don't know what else to say about it. It's an absolute bomb. The last card that I'm going to talk about doesn't actually have the energy symbol on it, but it's going to produce a ton of energy for us, and that's Winding Constrictor. If 1 or more counters would be placed on an artifact or creature you control, put that many of those counters +1 on that permanent instead. And if you would get 1 or more counters, you get that many of those counters +1 instead. That second ability means if we get energy, then we'll get an extra energy every single time. The downside is it kind of makes you easier to kill with Infect, but hopefully with some of the protection cards you have in the deck, it won't be that big of a problem. Okay, so we've seen a lot of effects that have to do with things dying and giving you energy, so we need a couple sacrifice outlets. The first 2 are Kudoltha Forgemaster and Trading Post. Kodolpha Forgemaster lets you tap it and sacrifice 3 artifacts to get an artifact onto the battlefield, which is amazing, especially if you can create artifact tokens. This just lets you get anything from your deck, basically. And Trading Post is probably one of the best cards in the deck, and it has a ton of abilities, but really, the only ones you care about are paying a life to get a goat, sacrificing a creature to return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand, and sacrificing an artifact to draw a card. This card does everything. Next on the list is going to be Thopter Foundry and Ashnod's Altar. Ashnod's Altar will let you get mana super quick, especially if you have the creatures to back it up or to recur. Just adding 2 colorless is huge, especially if you have like 3 or so creatures. You can just drop 6 mana down and it just gets you so much mana. And Thopter Foundry lets you sacrifice a non-token artifact to create a 1/1 blue Thopter with flying, and you gain a life. So it sets off your sacrifice, it gets you another creature that is also an artifact, and you gain a life. And the last 2 I'm going to be talking about are Hidden Stockpile and Skull Clamp. So Hidden Stockpile is Revolt. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, create a 1/1 servo artifact creature token. Now, I would probably put this card in the deck just because of that first ability, but it also has pay 1, sacrifice a creature, scry 1. So it lets you sacrifice, and it can potentially make you a ton of tokens. And Skull Clamp, while it's not really a sacrifice outlet, it lets you draw 2 cards when equipped creature is put into a graveyard. So it gives the creature -1 toughness. If you're making 1/1 tokens, which you are, pretty much you're setting off a death trigger and drawing 2 cards from it. It's amazing. So we're pitching stuff to the bin all the time, and if we keep doing that, we're eventually going to run out of cards. So we need things to bring it back. So right now, we have Scrap Trawler and we have Mere Retriever. Scrap Trawler says that when it or another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact card in your graveyard with lesser converted mana cost. Now, the most important thing is that it says it or another artifact you control. So, if you're sacrificing something that is huge, say a 7 mana artifact, then you can get anything in your graveyard that costs 6 or less and put it in your hand. In Mere Retriever, it says when it dies, return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So this also gets artifacts back, and it's a 1/1, so you can pitch it to Skull Clamp. The next 2 are Eternal Witness and Hana Ship's Navigator. Eternal Witness, just when it enters the battlefield, lets you get anything back from your graveyard, and you can also pitch it to Skull Clamp again. Now this one is a little bit slower, but it's potentially the better one, where you can pay 1 in a blue and tap it, return target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. Now we don't play too many enchantments, but some of the energy producers are enchantments, and if people destroy them, then we'll have a tough time generating energy. So this card is slow, but it's worth it. Now the last 2 I'm going to talk about are Sun Titan, or Fun Titan as I like to call him, and Revealark. So Sun Titan, when he enters the battlefield or attacks, you can return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So a lot of the things you're going to be sacrificing are tokens, but sometimes you'll be sacrificing things that you actually do kind of need again. So Sun Titan can return those back. And Revealark is the same thing. When it leaves the battlefield, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Again, that can get you Mere Retriever. It can get you a couple things. Now, of course, this isn't a great combo, but I'm playing it just for fun, and that would be the module Triplets. Now, they all work together, but I'll explain them one by one. So, Animation Module. Whenever 1 or more 1/1 counters would be placed on a permanent you control, you may pay 1 if you do create a 1/1 servo. And you can choose at any time to give a counter on target permanent or player and give it 1 more of that. So, if there's 1/1 counters, you can give more 1/1 counters to it and trigger the first ability, or you can choose yourself and give yourself more energy. Now, Fabrication Module is whenever you get 1 or more energy, you put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control, and you can tap it to gain energy. So this will help you get the 1/1 counters for this, which will then create a 1/1 servo. And the last is the decoction module. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get an energy counter, and you can return target creature you control to its owner's hand. So basically how it works is when a creature enters, you get an energy. When you get an energy, you get a 1/1 counter. And when you get a 1/1 counter, you get a creature. So with these three on the battlefield, if you play a creature, if you get an energy, or if you get a 1/1 counter, it's an infinite combo. And it's super fun. Not that great, but it is super fun. Now there's a bunch of sacrifice outlets in this deck, and we need good things to sacrifice that are also artifacts. So here's a couple really quick that are super good to sacrifice. We have Solemn Simulacrum, which lets you draw a card when it dies. Metalwork Colossus, which you can sacrifice 2 artifacts to return it from your graveyard to your hand, which is super good. It lets you sacrifice extra stuff after you've sacrificed it. Spine of Ishsa, which when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you return it to its owner's hand, and when it enters the battlefield, you destroy a permanent. So this works really well with Scrap Trawler, and it also destroys things really well. It can get out of hand as long as you have mana. Ichor Wellspring, which when it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard, draw a card. Perilous Mirror, when it is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, it does 2 damage to target creature or player. Now, it doesn't seem like much, but when you're sacrificing this all the time, it builds up, especially because it's a 1/1, and that can be put on Skullclamp. Servo Schematic gives you a 1/1 artifact creature token when it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard. Okay, and these are just some utility cards that I put in the deck. A lot of them are artifacts, and or they just help us win better or draw cards. And the first one is Rings of Brighthearth. Now this card is whenever you play an activated ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 2 generic mana. If you do, copy that ability. So you can copy the activates of Aetherworks Marvel, tap effects from Deadlock Traps, stuff like that. It's just really good. It works with a lot of cards in the deck. Next would be Panharmonicon, one of my personal favorite cards. Whenever an artifact or creature enters the battlefield and causes the triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. It's a lot of words, which basically means enter the battlefield abilities happen twice, which is super good, especially when you have enter the battlefield abilities producing energy, when you have it creating tokens. This works, again, like Rings of Brighthearth, with a lot of stuff in the deck. Next we have Rancor, which gives an enchanted creature +2/+0 and trample, and when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return Rancor to its owner's hand. So this card will not go away. It's going to add an extra card to your going to the graveyard triggers, and it goes right back to your hand when it does. And it also gives trample, which is great for Electrostatic Pummeler. It works as a finisher for him, or it's just an extra card to get you extra death triggers. This is also a bit of a win condition, which is Marionette Master. It's got Fabricate 3, and whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. Now, more often than not, I actually use the Fabricate 3 to put 3 1/1 counters on it instead of creating 3 1/1s, because we do generate a lot of tokens normally, and whenever an artifact dies, having someone lose 4 life is huge, especially if we're going to be doing that really, really often. This is just another token generator. Sly Requisitioner has Improvise, so you can cast it for cheap, and whenever a non-token artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you create a 1/1, which helps with Marionette Master. It helps with Skullclamp, it helps with death triggers, and it replaces the creature pretty much. So this card's really good. Elixir of Immortality. Sometimes we don't have all the recursion we need, so if we want the cards back, we can, in an emergency, tap it to sacrifice it, gain 1 life, and shuffle it in your graveyard into your library. This also works really well against graveyard hate. It's just kind of nice to have. And lastly, we have Contagion Engine. When it enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls, and you can pay 4 and tap it to proliferate, then proliferate again. So proliferating means you can choose any number of permanents and or players and give extra counters that they have on them. And so you're doing this twice. So say you have an energy, you tap this, you get 2 more energy. Being able to do this every turn speeds you up a lot. Okay, so that was a quick spotlight of Atraxa's Marvelous Paradox, the EDH/Commander deck. Let me know what you guys think. I'm going to leave the entire deck list in the description below. And did you like it? If you have any feedback for the video, that'd be greatly appreciated. It's really my first time ever doing a deck tech, especially one that's on video. So let me know in the comments if I can change anything. But thank you guys for watching, and have a great day.